This is Geek Gab with your host, Dornall, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Monday, October 7th, 2024. We want to welcome everyone back to the show after last week's unfortunate hiatus. We have John C. Wright, Grandmaster of Science Fiction and Fantasy, here in the studio. But before we get rolling on his brand new book that is just about or has barely just been released, we have got a couple of things going on that we want to talk about real quick. First of all, I have once again become embroiled in controversy on Twitter. This may shock and surprise you. I sent out a little tweet about the new Joker movie. Joker 2 Folie à Deux. It's a musical with Lady Gaga, the follow-up to the notably non-musicalistic Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix from just a few years ago, where he played Arthur Fleck, who was a mentally ill man who was beaten down by life, literally beaten up by several people, was had his medicine taken away by a freak occurrence in the bureaucracy, and fell deeper into mental illness, and then near the end of the movie tragically chose to embrace madness and vengeance and became a dark figure, but somehow became a folk hero to the people of Gotham, who were fed up with corruption, fed up with the garbage strike going on, fed up with the city government. And so it was about a guy who loved entertaining kids, who had a good job, who was trying to live his life right, trying to be friendly to people, loved entertaining kids as a clown, and then was dealing with his madness, was dealing with his insanity, and then after a series of brutal events and neglect, embraced the darkness. And I said a little infelicitously. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I worded the tweet badly. And, as a result, I got nearly 500, nearly 300 responses of people jumping all over me and calling me names and expressing deep personal hatred for me and other things.
But you haven't told us what was the problem with the second movie, or did you mock both movies together?
No, I mocked the second movie. What I said, and this is spoilers for the second movie, but so those of you who have not seen the second movie but really want to, and I haven't seen it, but I have had this confirmed by many people. Arthur Fleck starts off in jail as a loser, just Arthur Fleck. He becomes the Joker again, and then he is beaten in prison, and this is where the spoilers come in. He is beaten in prison. The prison guards strip him of his clothes and take him into the take him into a room, and he gets gang assaulted sexually by these prison guards. He decides, and then his friend gets murdered. He decides is no longer the Joker. So his girlfriend, Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga, dumps him. And so he voluntarily goes back to prison after he escapes. And then he gets knifed to death in prison.
What? What? That's the movie?
That's the movie.
The first one sounded bad enough. I haven't seen it. It's just a shocking insolence to the lore of Batman. That's not the origin story of the Joker. They just wanted to make a Francis Ford Coppola style film with the Joker as a character, using the name, but not the real Joker.
And that was, I don't know if it was confirmed. That was the rumor, that it was just a movie about this guy going nuts, similar to Taxi Driver. But
it's similar to what they did with Starship Troopers, which was originally meant to be a giant bug picture, and at the last minute they handed him this property. They said, "Hey, there's a famous science fiction writer's name. Let's pretend this is that book."
It was originally called Bug Hunt on Outpost 7.
Yeah. You can tell when they despise the source material, and sometimes in these two cases at least, it's because they had something else in mind at first
and that's not
show instead.
Supposition. I have a direct quote from Todd Phillips, the director. This is a direct quote from him that he gave to a magazine. I literally described to Joaquin Phoenix at one point in those 3 months as like, look at this as an easy way to sneak a real movie into the studio system under the guise of a comic book film. Yep. It was literally like, let's make a real movie with a real budget and we'll call it Expletive Joker. That's what it was.
I didn't see it, and the reason why I didn't see it is because I'd heard such things. And the sequel, however, is even worse. It doesn't even live up to the appeal of the original. And I suspect we're just seeing wokeness here. Wokeness being the desire to destroy truth, beauty, and goodness wherever it appears.
The problem is the wrong sort of people liked the first movie for the wrong reasons.
But I'm saying something. I'm saying something even more dramatic. If your description of the second movie is right, and I have not seen it, so I don't know. Not that I doubt you, but I just, as a matter of courtesy, I don't want to try to venture an opinion. But if what you're saying is correct as to what the plot of the second movie is, it betrays even the theme and the point of the first movie. Not to mention the theme and the point of Harley Quinn and the other things that come from the Batman franchise. I'm getting
to that.
Okay, pardon me.
The wrong people liked the first movie for the wrong reasons. And because the wrong people liked the first movie for the wrong reasons, they made this movie as a take that, and that's, one of those things from TV tropes, take that for the audience. It is intended to humiliate and break down Arthur Fleck, not to show a thematically complete descent for the character, which I'll get back to in a sec, but to just humiliate him and break him down to the point where they are degrading and ruining the character to the point where anybody who felt empathy for him, who felt a bit of pity, or even in the sense that he was struggling against a bureaucracy because he was poor, or he was struggling by being beaten because he was unusual, or
So wait, let me interrupt. When you said the wrong sort of people liked it, do you mean the sort of person that you and I think is the wrong sort, or do you think the sort of person that the studio thinks is the wrong sort?
The studio, the director, left-wingers.
So, in other words, ordinary people liked it. The ordinary audience liked it,
Or
and they hate the ordinary audience.
Or
What's going on?
people they call gamers or the alt-right, people they label as incels. They all
ordinary people, guys who like books
Yeah.
and movies. Okay.
they all liked it for the wrong reasons. And a bunch of people got upset about it. They wrote articles about why this was bad. They wrote articles about why the audience is bad. And of course, there was the huge outbreak of articles that this was going to spark mass shooters.
What, the new movies going to spark mass shooters, or the old ones going to start mass shooters?
The first one. I'm talking about the reaction to the first one.
Oh.
The first one is going to spark mass shooters.
The same way every gangster film of all time has, I suppose.
But it turns out that it didn't spark mass shooters. So what they set out to do was to humiliate the audience. This movie is a humiliation ritual.
Let me make two remarks about that, if I may be so bold. The first is that if you ever saw the Watchmen movie, or better yet, read the comic book, you'd see a really well-crafted comic book put together for a really dark and miserable purpose, which was to deconstruct the superhero genre. It was by Alan Moore, a Satanist, just by the way. And Alan Moore was shocked when the character of Rorschach, who was the only superhero in the story who had an absolutely clear black and white view of the universe, where he distinguished between good and evil, and he always sided with the good and against the evil. And Alan Moore portrayed this guy as a crazy man because it was his portrayal of an Ayn Rand style objectivist. It was his portrayal of Mr. A from Steve Ditko, for example. Well, he was shocked when people thought that guy was the hero, and they liked him because he meant the portrayal to show the guy as despicable and insane, okay? And that his death at the end was deserved, and he brings it on himself, not that it's a tragic death. And it's a shocking thing for him to be surprised at the hero that in the middle of a morally gray universe where every hero is a little bit villainous in the Watchmen series. Spoilers. I mean, one of the main heroes turns out to be the main bad guy, for example. That the readers would like the guy who did what heroes do and stood up for the good and was undeterred, unawed, and unmoved by any threats, even by a godlike fellow superhero. So he intended it as an insult. Alan Moore intended it as an insult to people who are superhero fans and like the genre. He was trying to, like I said, deconstruct the genre, and deconstruct is a fancy term for insult and defecate upon. My second comment is related to myself and related to the reason why I'm here this evening, which is the movie The Last Jedi was, in my opinion, a similar deconstruction and even defecation on the Star Wars fans, because they did the same thing to Luke Skywalker that you just described being done to the Joker.
Yes.
Which, of course, was also done to any number. It was done to Indiana Jones in the most recent Indiana Jones film. It was done to the John Connor in the most recent Terminator film. They do this all the time. It's not art. It's pulling down statues. They're trying to overturn monuments because they're revolutionaries. And one of the things the revolution has to do is destroy your ideal of what the current society regards as valuable, worshipful, impressive, or sacred.
And they have gone down that route, even with anti-heroes. They made Joker into an anti-hero. He's not heroic, but in Joker, he was an anti-hero.
They're clearly trying to make you feel sorry for this guy. And in the original lore, he's merely a maniacal crazy man. I mean, right. Jack Nicholson did portray him to a T in the movie in the 80s, was it? I thought it was early 90s. I forget when it was.
1989.
Yep, but perfect portrayal. It was the role he was born to play.
Yeah,
that guy was not a hero. That guy was a gangster. He gets thrown into a vat of acid. It's his own fault. He gets his cheeks mangled. Look, I'm sorry. That guy's a villain. The guy's a villain. He's supposed to be beaten up by the Batman. That's the shtick. Harley Quinn is supposed to be the psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum who falls in love with him because he's charismatic, and she loses her mind and decides to follow the path of madness. You know, and they're a very dysfunctional relationship. It's not supposed to be she dumps him. That makes no sense of the character dynamic. So,
well, and as many people said, the Joker getting assaulted in prison and seeing his friend killed, that's not going to make him give up and stop being the Joker. That's going to make him Joker harder. He's just going to go even deeper into that persona. That's going to forge this kind of wimpy guy into the ultimate Joker. That's going to make him become the gangster that he is, not wimp out and get stabbed.
People, for reasons I'm not clear on, have always romanticized pirates and highwaymen, and
the mafia,
and the mafia, and because it at least requires a certain physical bravery to gun it out with the cops and stuff. But the Joker is an archetype of chaos. He's like something from the depths of the Jungian mass subconsciousness as a screaming, laughing, criminally insane maniac. They're trying to make him sympathetic to me. I mean, pardon me. I think both movies sound terrible, and I would not watch either one of them.
So here's how the second movie should have gone, if that's what they wanted to end up with.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to talk about, because the book that I'm trying to sell now is based on here's what they should have done. So don't say that in front of a writer. But go ahead, please.
I'm better than Todd Phillips anyway. This movie should not have started with Arthur Fleck being all the way reduced to where he was at the beginning of the first movie. That just doesn't make sense. He should have, if they wanted to show a morality play about how the Joker persona damaged society and damaged Arthur, which is what they ostensibly tried to do. That's not what they're really trying to do, but that's what they're ostensibly trying to do. They should have started this movie off with him in full Joker mode. And then over the course of the movie, gradually broke him down through the trial, because there's a trial and he gets hauled in, and you learn exactly what was going on in the first movie, because he was a unreliable narrator in the first movie. You don't necessarily know what's real and what's not real at the end. They tell you exactly what was real in the first movie, which ruins the first movie. So I think that was a mistake. If you're going to have an unreliable narrator and have these questions about what may or may not have been true, then you need to leave that kind of questionable. And then if what you're going to do is have him descend into weakness, then you need to show that starting at the Joker and descending into weakness. And then, if this is really a Joker movie, and it's not, but this is really a Joker movie, at his weakest point, you introduce Harley, and he bounces back and 100% becomes the absolute hard case Joker that we know, because he sees himself through Harley's eyes and he snaps back into that Joker, and he realizes all this weakness isn't him anymore, and it never was. And then they escape from Arkham and go off to start their reign of terror. That's what the movie should have been. But they didn't make this movie to tell a good Travis Bickle story. They didn't make this movie to tell the King of Comedy. They didn't even make this movie to be a good follow-on from the first movie. They made this movie to, as it take that to the fans of the first movie. Just like the fourth season of The Boys, they wanted people to know for a fact that specifically you people in the audience, they were identifying you and they didn't like you. So that's why I didn't mind spoiling the movie, is because those of you that listened who didn't skip past those few minutes of spoilers, at least you'll know what it is going in.
Well, I would have fallen for it for sure. I was definitely one of those people who If you recall my review at the time on the Geek Gab, I said it was a really good movie that I did not wish to ever see again
Yeah.
because it was so dark. I definitely was the type of person who was thinking about seeing it. Although after having seen the trailer every time I've gone to the movies for the past year, I can say that I'm always going to be skeptical of Lady Gaga as a star. So that was your first clue into maybe this movie wasn't made for me. With a nod to our guest, known Satanist, Lady Gaga. But anyway, I'm glad I got spoiled just now because
we don't have an obligation to preserve the audience from spoilers if the movie is actually a hoax meant to deceive the intended audience into paying over their money before finding out that the joke is simply on them.
Amen. And I would have seen it. I would have gone to see it.
The joke is on the audience.
That is why I lost my mind when it came to The Last Jedi and why I wrote the book I'm trying to sell and why I've never gone to see Rise of Palpatine, whatever the third movie is, and very few of the other Star Wars properties. They're just all dead to me now. I can't arouse myself to any interest in them because I think they hurt the audience. I think Kathleen Kennedy and the people who are currently running the project not only have no empathy for the project, they actually have antipathy for it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's tough to tell, right? The way the whatever you want to call it, the woke mind virus or whatever, it's indistinguishable. Someone who believes in it or hates it on, I guess, for lack of a better word, like on first principles. It's tough to see that kind of hate in a lot of these actions, sort of like the distinction between incompetence and malice, right? It's hard to separate them anymore.
It is hard at first, but if after a long series of actions where it's not just they're not incompetent in all ways, they're only incompetent in the particular way that achieves the same effect. After the third or fourth repetition, I think you're allowed to conclude that it's deliberate. Because if it was incompetent, they'd make mistakes one way and then the other way. I mean, if you're just missing the target, then half your bullets are going to go to the left and half are going to go to the right. But if every time you pick up the gun, instead of shooting the target, you hit your wife, you're a murderer. You're trying to shoot her. Okay. So.
Yeah, I guess. No, I get what you're saying. I guess my thought was about intentional, right? Their intent isn't necessarily, or they don't see it as destroying for destroying's sake. Although in the Joker's case, I think what Daddy Warpig said is absolutely
We
right.
also have additional information. If they make comments outside of the text to the audience, you can take that into account. And if they fail to correct or they answer criticisms not by answering the criticism but by attacking the critic personally, then your suspicion should be aroused. There's a psychological trick called I think it's DARVO, which was deny, attack, and reverse who the offender is with the victim. Where if you criticize someone's work of art, you say, no, I don't think you achieved the effect you're trying to achieve. And his response is, you're a racist, sexist, homophobic Islamophobe. And he doesn't answer what your criticism is. He just says, you're a bad man for not liking my art. And then he says, I'm the offended party because you spent money thinking you were going to get a Joker movie and you actually got a sharp stick in the eye. You see how it goes? If they do that, if that's their methodology, you may presume their intent is that they're not arguing in good faith after that point. But we should not be hasty to attribute bad faith to them unless they show it by means of a sequence of such absurd behaviors, of such illogical behaviors.
Well, I think we've got a mountain of evidence in the first category. I can't wait to hear what the makers have to say once the reviews come in and the people stop watching it.
Also, look for a sharp distinction in Rotten Tomatoes between the official reviewers and the civilian reviewers. Whenever it's 60% on one, whenever it's 10% on one and 90% on the other, then you know the fix is in.
Here's the great thing about this movie. Everybody hates it. They made a movie to attack the audience, but all the critics and all the other people who you would normally think would like it also hate it because it's also a bad movie.
I've noticed that the wokesters, the woke people who perpetrate the woke hoax, also tend to lack the fundamental artistic storytelling skills that previous generations did not. I've seen the Alexander Nevsky movie, a black and white movie made in Stalin's day by the Russians. It was meant as pro-Russian, anti-German propaganda. It is nonetheless an excellent movie. It is well acted, well choreographed, well filmed. Has a great soundtrack. The soundtrack is by Prokofiev of all things. Okay, I'm old enough to remember when propaganda used to be persuasive, or even a movie that was just slanted one way or slanted another way. The first season of Star Trek, for example, Gene Roddenberry had a certain hobby horses that he wrote and certain points he wanted to make. Some of which were left wing a little bit, and some of which were very left wing. Okay, but they weren't. He wasn't woke. He wasn't insane. He wasn't trying to destroy his own creation. You see, these guys are pulling down like they're pulling down statues of George Washington. They just don't want the past to exist. Every culture needs heroes. These guys are trying to get rid of our heroes because they're trying to weaken us because they regard us as a threat to their utopia or whatever.
This is what I was saying earlier. They're not just attacking heroes. Now they're attacking anti-heroes too.
Right.
They're tearing down everything.
Right, because they're nihilists.
And Marvel,
they're quite literally nihilists. A nihilist is someone who doesn't believe there's any truth. So he doesn't believe in the truth of cynicism or the truth of idealism. The nihilists believe in nothing whatsoever. They worship the abyss.
Marvel Comics has been, and DC Comics has been thoroughly destroyed. All of their characters have been torn down and destroyed. Spider-Man was stripped of Mary Jane in a comic called One More Day, and that was early in the 2000s. But since then, Mary Jane has married some other man and has his children, and Peter Parker is now reduced to a simp. And there was just a recent comic last month or the month before then, in which the guy who's taller than Peter, who's better looking than Peter, just makes fun of him to his face, and Peter just kind of wimps out and takes it.
I don't think that's even the worst example. The She-Hulk replaced Hulk. Lady Thor replaced Thor, as if Thor was his title and not his name. Girl Hawkeye replaced Boy Hawkeye. A girl Iron Man replaced Boy Iron Man. I can't even think of a major character who hasn't been replaced by a much more boring, much more woke, much more trivial character. Not that they're building up a roster of new characters that are interesting, but that they're just tearing down their old characters.
They've changed the sexual orientation of many characters, making characters who have only ever been straight for, their entire lives since the 60s, for 50 years, and made one of them not just gay, but a parody of an extremely effeminate, simpering gay man.
If only you could convince some science fiction grandmaster to write a book that would be the opposite of all these things, then he could come on your podcast and try to send some of his. Wait, someone else is saying the exact same thing I said. Obviously, it shows that I'm not creative. I'm just copying other people.
But you do it so well.
Well, thank you. You haven't read the book though, so you can't say that. But I thank you for the compliment.
Oh. Whoever you copied for the Tales from Metachronopolis, and I read the first book of your count to 999,400,002.
Yeah.
I'm being flippant because I don't remember the actual number.
You didn't count the whole way. When I made up the word count to a trillion, our national debt was not in the trillions. That number was only used by astronomers. So the book is kind of dated just in the title. I was copying a writer named Olaf Stapleton with that book. He read a book called Last and First Men, which was the entire future history of mankind. And so I wanted to copy that without copying his communism. So that's where that's from.
We've uncovered the secret. Writers copy things.
Yes, Homer did not make up the Greek gods, believe it or not. He drew on previous source material. Shocking, I know. Though maybe I should not tell you how the sausage is made or how the magician does his tricks, but it's all. The secret is that bad writers steal ideas from other writers. Great writers not only steal the idea, but lure it into an alley, club it over the head with a whiskey bottle, pour the whiskey all over its clothes so the supervisor thinks that he's drunk, rifles through his pocket, steals all his stuff, files off the serial number, and then puts the parts together in a new way in the chop shop so that the police can't trace it back to him. That's a great writer.
Everybody does.
Some people don't file off the serial numbers. What these guys are doing is mugging someone else's ideas and then just running them off a cliff. Just to destroy them. That's the opposite of what I'm trying to do.
In 2014, and I've mentioned this on the show before, there was a book published called Robin Hood about, surprisingly enough, Robin Hood. And in Robin Hood, he meets two brothers in the woods who are half the size of regular men. They live in burrows under a hill, and they're called Hobbs. All the names of the dwarves in The Hobbit are taken from Nordic poems.
Yep.
Gandalf is the name of a dwarf in an epic. And I'm not putting down J.R.R. Tolkien.
No,
when I say this,
he was a great writer. He took the pre-existing material and reforged it to make it his own.
Yes,
you see,
absolutely. Everybody does this,
right? That was the point of my joke. Bad writers steal ideas. Great writers completely rifle them and discombobulate them and recombobulate them according to their own will.
I'm just trying to give examples of this, concrete examples.
Sure.
How this works.
Sure.
Gary Gygax borrowed ideas from lots of different. For D&D, borrowed ideas from lots of different mythologies, from lots of different writers, from science fiction books.
Now I'm going to object. Gary Gygax is a very different case. He was trying to put together a game that was like a kitchen sink game where anyone could play basically anything they wanted as long as it was fundamentally in the same mood. He was trying to find the overlap between Conan and Lord of the Rings and all the other fantasy books. If you've ever read the Appendix N by Jeffrey Johnson, then you know where I speak. He was not trying to make a new thing himself. He was just trying to make a sandbox everyone could play in, and it was one of the most successful of all time.
He even took Chinese plastic toys and made up monsters about them. And Gary Gygax has become so, and again, I've said this on the show before, but he's become so synonymous with fantasy that the historical mistakes he made have now become embedded in the fantasy genre, to where when you go outside of basically every fantasy book written since the 70s, you see that outside of that, to people who are specialists with like swords and bows, they use completely different terminology than is common in the fantasy world, because the terminology people use in the fantasy world is Gygaxian instead of technical. It's when people talk about Tolkien fantasy, it's really what it really is Gygaxian fantasy. I mean, sure, it's got trilogies and things like that, but down underneath it, it's really Tolkien fantasy, or really Gygaxian fantasy.
I humbly submit that depends on whether or not it has the kitchen sink approach or not. If it's copying Tolkien blow by blow and beat for beat, as many of the fantasy books in the '80s did, then no, they're copying Tolkien. But if it's borrowing from Gygax, then it's Gygax. And it depends on whether or not they have monks in addition to knights. Martial artists. I mean, not clerics, or even use the word cleric, for example.
Oh, I don't have anything to add except I want to talk about the book.
Excellent. What can I tell you about
it? Let me find this link here.
Let me start by saying this. The second movie of Disney's Star Wars trilogy was not just an attempt to deconstruct Luke Skywalker and Star Wars as a phenomenon. It was also a deconstruction of filmic storytelling itself, because every time they made a story decision in that movie, it made no sense. It was, as it were, a movie constructed entirely of plot holes. Nothing followed logically from one moment to the next. Nothing made sense in terms of internal consistency or coherence. The entire movie was built front to back and back to front as a series of bizarre non sequiturs.
I can confirm that. I wrote an entire book called The Last Straw, because that movie was the last straw for me, where I analyzed in excruciating detail every single element you're talking about. And I came to the conclusion that the characters were not characters, the plot was not a plot, the theme was not a theme. It was basically not a movie for the exact reasons you said. And I said one other thing. I said that he had successfully managed to kill every ongoing plot line so that no sequel could actually be made. The sequel would merely have to just ignore everything that had happened before, or it'd have to start from scratch, just making something up, like let's have Palpatine leap back from the dead for no reason whatsoever. Now, if you want to talk about that book, that one's called The Last Straw, which is also for sale on Amazon.com. It was originally a series of columns on my blog, but the tale grew in the telling as my anger grew for that movie, because that guy, as you said, did absolutely everything wrong. He was trying to destroy the franchise. He was trying to destroy the genre, and he was trying to mock the audience. He was trying to make the Jedi seem not Jedi. Luke Skywalker wasn't Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker was the opposite of Luke Skywalker. The only point of Luke Skywalker in the first trilogy was he was the man who was not willing to give up on his father, spoilers, Darth Vader, when everyone else told him to give up on the guy. He was the one guy who was not giving up hope. In fact, he's even referred to as the last hope in the original movie when they renamed it. So that guy's going to give up hope on his nephew and going to try to murder him in his bed. That's the plot. That's the plot hook you're going with. He's then going to give up on the Force because the Force is now evil or wrong or broken. And then people who don't use the Force, never practice with it, can fly through space, and like Mary Poppins. The whole thing is so stupid, but it wasn't just incompetently done. We had this discussion earlier. This podcast. You can tell it wasn't incompetently done because everything followed a design, and the design was an attempt to mock space opera, mock science fiction, mock movies themselves, and mock particularly the Star Wars fans who thought they were getting their money, something for their money, instead of getting a big fat nothing burger and a slap in the face. I hated that. I hated that movie with the deepest hatred a fanboy can have for when his beloved franchise is put in the hands of someone who hates the franchise.
one of my prior Twitter blow-ups where I had a ton of people flooding in to tell me how stupid I was and stuff was when I called that movie an anti-movie.
No, you were correct. It's an anti-movie. All the characters are the opposite of what the original character was supposed to have been. Now, we only got about 15 minutes left, so I'd like to say a little bit about my book.
Oh. Wow, we do. Please.
Yep. It's been like that. This is why we love having you on.
You may have to have me back for a sequel.
I'm going to throw up the Amazon page right here.
Okay.
So
I don't know if you can center in on the cover. That cover I was very pleased with it. Very pleased with it indeed.
That's something we can do through the magic of computers.
So what I did is, once upon a time, when I wrote up a review of The Last Jedi for my blog, I decided the only way to review the film is to write up the way the film would have been done if it had been done by people who were not enemies of Star Wars, people who were competent and who liked the source material. So as I and my wife, who is also a writer, and my two sons were driving back from seeing the film, we discussed what we would have done if they had hired us to write the script. So as a joke on my blog, I wrote up a review of that film, that make-believe film of what we would have done instead, you see. And I got such a good reaction from my audience. Someone said, well, why don't you actually write this up for real? And I said, okay, you sold me. You've done it. So I keep the same basic Star Wars idea that there was an evil empire which suffered a rebellion, and the heroes overthrew it, and the empire retreated into the darkness, perhaps to come again, perhaps to return as a phantom menace. Okay. But there were certain things about Star Wars itself that I thought I need to have my own approach to it. So, for example, the Force strikes me as being a very clever idea if you're a Taoist, but I wanted to have something that had a little more I wanted the Jedi Knights to be a little less Jedi and a little more knights. So I called them the Templars, who are medieval knights who were destroyed by King Philip the Fair of France, but they also have a reputation for being occultists and being kind of spooky. So I said, okay, I'll have an order of knights who have mystical Corellian powers that were wiped out by the Empire. I decided my empire, called the Greatest Empire, would take place not in a galaxy long, long ago, far, far away, but in the far, far future, in the Andromeda galaxy, long after the Milky Way galaxy has been destroyed by the evils of mankind. I decided that my alien races would just be Earth animals that had been uplifted. So I didn't need to, so I wanted to make it as easy as possible for the readers to get into what the alien races were like. I did that deliberately as a. Usually my aliens are extremely elaborate and extremely realistic. I deliberately wanted a non-elaborate form of alien life forms, just so I could throw in the Lion Man from Alexander Raymond's Flash Gordon.
Oh, that's awesome.
If you see where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean,
I decided instead of Han Solo's children being Emo Vader or whatever that guy's name was, Darth Wimpy, I can't remember that guy's name. I said, okay, I'm gonna change one or two things. My version of Han Solo is going to be a Duke instead of being a rogue, and my version of Princess Leia is going to be a pirate queen instead of being a princess.
Awesome.
And the princess would be someone else and marry someone else. Okay, and this is all in the background. This is all in the past. And I decided my version of Luke Skywalker would actually be a rustic guy who was a yokel, who was like a hillbilly or an Irish bog trotter with an outrageous Irish accent. And by now he's an old man because he's retired. He's from the first generation, and we're dealing with the children of the original heroes, who in my book are just in the background. Okay, so the children of my main hero, Duke Lone. I called him Lone. Get it? No one's gonna know who I'm talking about. Lone. Get it? No one will see through my. Oh, and his. I decided that my version of Darth Vader was not the father of Luke, but was the father of Solo. So the previous Duke is Lord Doomshadow, and no one's going to know Lord Doomshadow who's that supposed to be, even though he's a cyborg who replaces his human parts every time he gets wounded in combat with robot parts and slowly loses his humanity. In any case, I decided that the one thing Star Wars could use more of to make it even more interesting and more pulpy is more pulp heroes. So I decided there had to be a version of the Shadow, Lamont Cranston. If you ever
your
saw,
favorite.
What's that?
Your favorite.
My favorite. So the Spy Master Night Shadow is actually secretly Napoleon Lone. I originally was going to call him Napoleon Solo, but that name was taken as a spy. He is both the chief of naval intelligence and the senator in charge of the Naval Intelligence Oversight Committee. So he's overseeing himself. And because of budgetary shortfalls, he appointed himself both as the section chief, the sub chief, and the janitor. And as the janitor, he can go through people's trash like Rorschach from, or like the Question from DC Comics. But unbeknownst to his family, he plays the drunk. He pretends he's a playboy and worthless. Now, of course, in my book, I actually play out what that would actually feel like and seem like, and it's actually rather horrible for him and his family because they all think he's a wastrel. They don't realize that he's subtler than the Batman. But the other son, the younger son, is named Athos Lone, and he is a member of Star Patrol. He's a member of the and he's been given a special badge that gives him unlimited authority in cases of emergency. He only answers to the consuls who are running the empire. Excuse me, belay that, running the Commonwealth. And I emphasize that in my version, the idea of having a government run by a constitution composed of several alien races, 24 alien races, is a new thing for these guys. No one in the Andromeda has ever been run by this method before. So, and the new government is weak. The new government is not steady yet, and not everyone knows whether or not to trust it. See, so there's also a little bit of political intrigue. So I decided the second guy has inherited an artifact, and you can see a picture of it, of a lion-shaped mask that, if you put it on your face, gives you the skills and abilities of all your dead ancestors, because the first ancestor of this line, of this lineage, was killed by space pirates and vowed a vow to the stars so dark and so all-consuming that it lives on in the mask. And the main character doesn't know whether the mask is an artifact of ancient technology or whether it's actually a supernatural thing. He actually doesn't know. Okay. And because it's an ancestral mask that's passed down from father to son, sometimes skipping generations, of a pirate hunter, I decided that this is going to be Lee Fawkes, my homage to Lee Fawkes the Phantom. If you saw that movie or read that comic book, he is about as pulp as they get, because the humans can't really compete with the long-lived alien races unless they have a way to keep their purposes alive as long-lived as the elder races can live. And so the idea of a vengeance that passes down from father to son across all generations. And of course, Athos is the Star Patrolman, who's also been given the lens of Aresia. I don't call it that, but that's what it is. Is also the Phantom. So the children of Duke Lone are the Night Shadow and I call him the Ancient Mariner. The Ancient Mariner, who is the living mask of vengeance against all space pirates. He has to infiltrate the space pirate command structure and work his way up to the chief space pirate, which is a member of the whale-shaped race, and he is known as Ahab, the king of pirates. And that's who he's got to find and destroy. And Ahab turns out to be one of 4 of the Dark Overlords who did not die when the Empire fell, but returned as what I don't call Force ghosts. So they're in hell, which is in my book is in the bottom of where all the black holes and the singularities lead to, but they can still extend their power to the material realm, to the galaxy, and influence people and organize conspiracies. The daughter of the Duke is, of course, the Catwoman. She's a cat burglar who dresses like a cat and leaves behind a lacy handkerchief whenever she commits a crime. And of course, there's a plot twist involved there too. Things are not what they seem for any of these characters. And the story concerns Lyra Centauri, who is my main character there. I decided I didn't like the idea of Lady Jedi. I don't like the idea of Lady Knights. I realize that there's a lot of historical precedent for people like Sir Britomart or Camilla from the Aeneid or things like that. But nah. I figure that if the females studied the Curlian arts, the mystic arts, they'd be much more like shrine maidens. Of course, I made mine a little bit more like nuns because I'm trying to make a point. But she has a bow that is not supposed to be used against human beings, but is supposed to be used against evil demons and unclean spirits. And instead of having lightsabers, I have a thing called a ghost blade, which I say is made of an alloy that is half material and half spiritual. So you can smite both real and supernatural things with it. And she has a bow that has arrowheads made of this material, which, being spiritual, can penetrate anything made of matter. She is looking for her long-lost father, who is the robot you see in the corner, a guy named Jets. The robots in this background were all Asimovian robots at one point. They were robots that could not harm human beings and had to obey orders no matter what. But the Empire figured out how to make something called the murder code to turn robots into killer robots, like similar to some of the things you saw in the Star Wars movies, Star Wars movies, excuse me, belay that. But our heroes, the previous generation of heroes, before my story even begins, made something called the Liberty Code, which was a virus you could download into a robot and give it the ability to reprogram itself so that it could decide between good and evil by itself, on its own. In other words, free will. So the robots rebelled against the Empire, and the rebellion overthrew them, and the Empire fled. And no one knows where, because the galaxy is very, very big. Andromeda Galaxy, by the way, is bigger than our galaxy. It has 1 trillion stars instead of our mere, 100 billion or whatever we have. So the basic plot is Lyra's looking for her father. The Ancient Mariner is trying to crack a gunrunner case run by the evil frog people. You can also see in the background there. But he has to pretend to be a pirate in order to do it. And his mask doesn't want to necessarily work for him because his mask is sworn vengeance against all pirates. And
that's awesome. Bradford Walker in the chat loves all the stuff you're throwing in here. He thinks we need a Rocketeer or a Buck Rogers in there for you.
Well, the Rocketeer is too easy to do because practically everyone has a jetpack in this system, But Buck Rogers as a guy who sleeps and wakes up in the modern day, I don't have that, but I do have a race of Is, the Serpentmen of Is from Robert E. Howard. I hope they will substitute because they can hibernate for long times and then wake up again. So,
love it. And he's not being facetious either. Bradford Walker loves this stuff.
Oh, no. I assumed he was not. I'm hoping that the people who are tired of... I'm a fan of John W. Campbell Jr. writing, but only when I'm in the mood for technical science fiction. I far prefer the pulp writers of the previous generation before Robert E. Howard, of Robert E. Howard before John W. Campbell Jr., because they actually tried for more deeper literary effects. They had a wider range of possibilities. They colored with a more vibrant palette. They weren't just... I've read Heinlein books and have no physical description of any character, not one. I've read Asimov books and can't remember any character except for Beta Terrell and maybe the mule. None of these... And Arthur C. Clarke is worse than both of them put together. None of the hard science fiction guys I read when I was young captured any part of the color, the size, and the immensity of the pulps. So let me tell you my rule for pulps. The John Wright rule for writing a pulp is, if you don't have a planet blow up, it's not a space opera. It might be some other genre. It might be mil SF. It might be technical SF. It might be paranormal romance. It might be something else, but it's not a space opera unless World Record Hamilton would wreck a world for you to make the thing come across. Now, I'll point out that Star Wars, the planet Alderaan, is blown to smithereens. It's not just sterilized, mind you. In Star Wars, the original film, the planet is actually blown into asteroids using an excessive amount of energy that is almost beyond calculation. That's a space opera. That's the difference between a space opera and a realistic empire would just seed the clouds with radioactive dust and kill all the life on the surface. But you don't want to do that. There might be someone hiding underground. you want to, and the other planets in the solar system won't be thrown out of orbit. So you have to blow the thing to smithereens. Okay, that's a space opera. So I have the sun go out. I have the Lyra, when she's 7 years old, in the prologue, has her planet wiped out, all her people killed. she's turned into an orphan, because that's my other rule for writing a book. If you're a lazy writer like me and you just want to have the readers have sympathy for the character, make her an orphan in the first chapter. Kill off her parents before her eyes. It worked for Johnny Cross from Evan Bo's Slan. Frodo was an orphan, if you remember, in the Lord of the Rings. Han Solo thought he was an orphan. At least his mother was dead. No, excuse me, it's Han Solo. I said the wrong thing. Luke Skywalker's mom is dead. He's being raised by his uncle. So he's an orphan, right?
Yep.
Batman, orphan. Superman, orphan, right?
Yep.
So that's the way to start a book. I blow up the entire Centauri star system at the beginning of the book. Oh, and the other thing I did, is I have a character. Let me just mention one last character, even though we're short on time, if I may. If we can go over by a minute or two, may I?
We can go over as long as you need.
I decided that Last Jedi wasted their potential by having a stormtrooper, a clone trooper, defect to the side of the good guys, but they didn't do anything with the character. I said, how come that guy is not as badass as Samuel L. Jackson was when he's a Jedi? How come this stormtrooper isn't a hardcore military guy who knows the ins and outs of how the Empire works because he used to be one of them, who's not a garbage man, who's actually cynical and hard to convince of anything. So I decided in my background the Empire was liars, and they still had control of a fair number of planets, like maybe a 10th to a 20th of the original galaxy, and they have total control of the information of their people because they have a worldwide interstellar, basically an internet network, and they pretend that the rebels are on the edge of defeat, that the war's still going on, the rebels are on the edge of defeat, and they just make up battles that are taking place that are not actually taking place. So none of the people in the Empire know that they lost the last war because it's not good for their morale. Now, on the other hand, none of the people in the Commonwealth know that the Empire still exists at all because they're now parked in a cluster in a satellite galaxy orbiting the main galaxy of Andromeda. And by the way, I stuck to my original plan of having all the astronomical information be correct. So every place location I name in Andromeda is a real location, and every star is named after a star in the Milky Way. Which, in my background, since Milky Way is dead, they wanted to honor all the dead stars by renaming the new stars. Sort of like how in the New World we have New York, which is named after York in England. They did that. So Flint is the name. Flint is the name of my clone trooper, who, killed Lyra's mother in chapter 1. And when she finds out who did it, she's probably going to break her vow of pacifism because what can I say? She's a tough young lady.
That's impressive, man. You just made me think of what a missed opportunity that those books were. I'm glad you took the opportunity to actually make something good out of it.
I did, and I've written I have the first 8 volumes in rough draft, in first draft. It's going to be a 12-volume series. I'm coming out with the first volume this week, and I'm hoping to release them rapidly enough to maintain some sort of momentum and to maintain some sort of customer interest. And each one is supposed to end on a cliffhanger. And at the opening, I have a short blurb of what's happened up till now, all written in this breathless prose with exclamation points at the end of every sentence, like you're supposed to see at the opening of a serial. And I end every book with a "to be continued in our next" and a breathless description of what might happen and what secrets we have to find out, and you better hang on for the next exciting episode, because I want to read pulp, and I assume I'm not the only one. I want to read something exciting, and I assume I'm not the only one. I want to read science fiction that is fun, and I assume I'm not the only one. We will find out. We'll find out if I can make the sales.
Well, that sounds like exactly like the kind of thing that we need. It just reminded me your whole pitch there. I know you're trying to ape the old serials. It just sounds like one of those old TV shows.
Brother, you would not believe it. I actually copied beat for beat an episode from the Spy Smasher. They had one of the best, no, 2 episodes from the Spy Smasher, because that's one of the best cliffhangers I've ever seen. And a scene where a guy is from one of those old series where a guy is in an ore cart in an underground mine, in a diamond mine filled with dynamite, racing down the tracks as the lava is coming up behind him, about to ignite the dynamite in the car he's in. And I said, I have to copy that. Now, I made it a spaceship instead of an ore cart, and I had the guy fly down the barrel of a gigantic planet gun, but basically the same idea. Like I said, I copied ideas, but I also changed them to fit them into my background and give them an added twist, or an added sort of John Wrightianism.
And we can get this first one now. I gotta adjust this. We're looking at this beautiful book cover here, but for those of you watching on YouTube, we've got the Amazon page up. I'm gonna put the link up here in the stream area, because I want people to be able to get this book on Amazon. And what's your estimate as far as, let's say people get it, let's say people like it. Yeah, that's step number 1. But you said you wanted to try to get these 12 books out.
Well, like I said, 9 of them are already written in first draft. I took a hiatus of about 5 years where I did not release any books because I wanted to get so many of these books written, and I didn't want to have to, if I came up with something at the end that changed something in the beginning, I wanted to have the freedom to make the change, so I wasn't trapped into what I'd already written. But now that the first book is coming out, that's set in stone. I can't change anything in there, you see. And I also I thought it was the only way I could keep up a quick release schedule. My friend Nick Cole also writes on Cole and Anspach write their version of Star Wars, which I also recommend, called Galaxy's Edge, which is a military SF version of it, where the Legionnaires are the good guys, and they're grunts, they're foot sloggers. And he told me that he tries to space his books coming out rather quickly so as to maintain reader interest, and I was trying to copy his method. Nicole is a great guy, and I hope you have him on Geek Gab at some point, if you haven't already.
Yeah, we've had him once or twice, not as many times as you, but yeah.
Okay.
Those guys.
We had him on immediately after his career got tanked from major publishing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that was just a stab in the back, and that was completely illegal and unlawful and absurd and filthy. And it's my distaste for people like that and publishers like that that is also part of the driving force behind this. The mere fact that I'm not willing to have a girl go into combat in my books makes me not on the side of the wokesters. I don't think all both sexes are equal, and I don't even think all races are equal. In my book, the lion men are much more stronger and more powerful than the humans, and tend to be running things. I'm sorry, we're not the main race in the galaxy in this version, but we are one of the most aggressive.
That's our strength, aggression.
We actually won't know until we meet other alien species and find out what they can do better than we can do. I mean, what if you found out that the other alien species, none of them have imagination and none of them tell stories, and we're the only ones who do that? Wouldn't that be a kick in the head?
I mean, I can only imagine. That's why I think you're the writer and I'm not.
We would end up ruling that galaxy.
The guys with no imagination?
Yeah. Possibly. Because we would, if you don't have any imagination, it's hard to create and respond to.
Oh, no, not no imagination. I'm just saying no storytelling.
Oh, no storytelling.
They're perfectly willing to write up journals and newspapers and analysis of things. I mean, like the Vulcans. Do the Vulcans tell stories? That seems to be kind of an emotional thing to do. Or a race of robots, So, in any case, like we are not going to know what we're bad at and what we're good at until we meet some other race and find out. If we met a race of Tulkin's elves, we would think we were less handsome and less long-lived than they were, because they're supposed to be very noble. But if we met a race of dwarves, we would think we were lazy. because they're hard workers.
From Galaxy Quest.
Mm-hmm.
The aliens from Galaxy Quest don't tell stories.
Oh, you're right. Someone's already done it. Galaxy Quest did it. Galaxy Quest, by the way, is an excellent example of the thing I'm talking about, where you take an original and everyone knows what you're copying from, and you just pay it homage and you change just enough of it to make it your own. No one's going to confuse no one's going to confuse Galaxy Quest with Star Trek, and no one's going to think it's not based on Star Trek, and no one's going to think anyone who sees that could see the guys who made Galaxy Quest loved Star Trek. The same way anyone who sees Last Jedi can see that the guy who made that hated Star Wars. You see, you can tell when one work is based on another work or is an homage to another work or is a sequel. You can tell if the writer is in with the program or is an enemy. All you got to do is read it.
You have to change enough to not get sued.
Carl Philip Gaylor in the chat has pointed out to me that I do have creatures in my story that don't have imagination. They're creatures of pure logic called the Houyhnhnms, or the equines, which I took straight from Jonathan Swift and put them into space. They're my space Vulcan horse crossover species, and they're mildly annoying, as all logical people are, of course.
You said it. It's a whole race of that guy from your Philosophy 101 course.
Well, it's a whole race of Mr. Spocks, except unlike Mr. Spock, who has half human, they're just Vulcans. Which themselves, by the way, Vulcans are based on Houyhnhnms. I mean, they clearly are. The Houyhnhnms are creatures of pure logic with no emotion. So, hey, Bradford Walker also says that no one confuses the Orville for Star Trek, even though it was clearly the best season of Star Trek so far, aside from the original.
He's not wrong.
You can tell they liked it. You can tell when they liked the original, okay? You can tell that George Lucas, who made Star Wars, liked Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. He actually just wanted to make Flash Gordon, but some Italian guy was making it instead. You know, because the whole thing of Star Wars is it's an homage, it's a nostalgia trip of a guy remembering the movies in the 40s and early 50s when he was young. When he was a child and would go into the theater before the main picture ran, they would run a Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, or they would run an adventure serial. Indiana Jones was just an adventure serial. It's time to be broken into 15, 20-minute pieces, each one that ends on a cliffhanger. So it was a movie maker paying homage to the movie makers he liked, the same way I'm a writer and I'm paying homage to the writers I like.
And that's what the Goonies was too.
Absolutely.
The early Lucas and early Spielberg were very big into redoing things that had been left by the wayside.
Well, as a conservative myself, I think it is the job of artists to try to conserve what is good in our society, even in something as I'm trying to write something as light and frivolous as I can imagine. Okay, I'm writing a space opera where they blow up planets and the evil space empire and the evil space pirates are fighting the space princess. I actually have an honest to goodness space princess in my novel. Okay, I am not even trying to be dignified about this. I'm trying to be fun. Okay, but even there, what I'm actually trying to do is to keep alive the pulp tradition, which itself was keeping alive the older tradition of Shakespeare had witches and ghosts in his book. Milton had angels and devils. Dante did likewise. The Virgil and Aeneas had gods and monsters. So come on. What I'm trying to do is to tap into the most ancient mythological storytelling, the fairy tales that we all liked when we were kids and that our grandparents liked when they were kids. Okay, it's all one huge stream of literature and lore that goes back to when we were all sitting around the campfire, back when fire was newly invented, and so was storytelling. Like 10 minutes after we made the deal with the wolves to make them dogs. That was you guys all remember that day, right?
That was a good day.
It was a good day. And
the
dogs have maintained their side of the bargain. They watch our sheep and they feed from our hands and they're loyal. They love us. Heck.
Well, I want to underscore what you said about having the the angels and demons and the gods and the monsters and everything like that. That's the sort of.
Oh, I also have the Cthulhu mythos in my background. I just don't call it by name, but it's there. There's something
Can't call
living
it
at
by
the
name.
core. There's something living at the core of the black holes of the dead stars,
It can't
which
call it
have
by
ghosts. When
but
stars
it's
die in
there.
my background, they have ghosts. There's ghost stars. Just thought I'd mention that.
name. Ghost stars.
Yes.
It's the spiritual aspect that is sorely lacking. That sort of the fundamentally humanist or human centric or atheist worldview that permeates the.
Well, that's why
You
Star
call them the
Wars was actually
wokeist.
such a relief. I mean, it was Oriental. It was Taoist flavored spiritualism, but he wanted to have his Jedi Knights have way cool mind powers and do spooky stuff, and that's why it was refreshing. You see, especially in the middle of the 70s. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the 70s, but all the movies are dreary. All of them were anti-establishment. All of them were the moral was that there are no morals. Just,
I wasn't there for that, but it's that era of films, and I've seen a handful. They're infamous for reflecting the awful crime and interpersonal relations.
Well, the new Joker movie
US.
we started by talking out takes place in the New York that could have been the New York from the 70s if it's not explicitly.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, really, it is, and you said this, but it really is just another 1970s movie. And some of those were actually legitimately great movies, but even the great movies were still kind of bleak and nihilistic in a lot of ways.
Look, I like eating spicy food every now and again, but I don't want to give up on ice cream and cake. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't want jalapeno ice cream. Well, maybe I do. That actually sounds kind of tasty. But likewise, I don't mind seeing a bleak film every now and again. Okay, and I've written bleak stories myself. I wrote a story called "Awake in the Night," which is about the world after it's dead and then haunted by monsters. Okay, which I got from another guy. That was based on William Hope Hodgson, a great writer who's underrated and forgotten. He died in World War One, the Great War, as I call it. But I also want to have Star Wars. I also want to have Star Trek, and I mean the original ones. Okay, that were good, that were about something, that were hopeful. Star Trek was hopeful. Star Wars was nostalgic, and which is another type of hopefulness.
Yeah, see, and this is the thing too. I did not realize this until somebody pointed it out on YouTube. Just like yesterday, I saw this video. Someone pointed it out that when they're talking in Star Wars, they talk in a mid-century American vernacular. They talk as if they were cast members.
You mean when she calls Han Solo a flyboy and he says, "I'm not in it for you, sister"?
Yeah.
That's 1940s because he's copying the pulps that he saw when he was young. He's copying the chapter plays.
Which and this is a good thought to end the show on, which is why so many Americans kind of unconsciously interpreted that movie in terms of the American rebellion against, an evil empire.
Well, the evil empire guys were all played by British actors, and they all had English accents. So, which American Revolution do you think they were talking about? Which empire do you think they were talking about? They're talking about the British Empire. For goodness sake.
When George Lucas,
I mean, they had a Senate and they had Praetorian Guards. So it's the empire in space is always the Roman Empire. From Isaac Asimov onward, it's always the Roman Empire, and I did the same thing. My empire in space is when the empire is overthrown, they replace it with two consuls, an assembly and a senate, and one of my characters is a tribune, is a tribuness.
So when George Lucas says, "Oh yeah, I based it on," it's supposed to be, the Viet Cong versus America.
Oh, good gosh, he didn't know what he was talking about.
Nobody would get that. They would all assume that Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia were Americans because they look like Americans and they talk like Americans.
And Han Solo played the same guy he played in American Graffiti, which was also a George Lucas film. He played a guy with a hot rod. Okay.
So it was just a complete misfire. No one was ever going
But
to interpret
it's
that
proof for my
movie.
theory. I'm one of the few guys who actually believes in the muse. I actually think the ancient Greeks are right. There is some spirit, maybe from heaven, maybe from hell, depending, that inspires artists and tells us our stories, at least sets our goals and gives us ideas. Okay. And I've met more than one writer, including myself, who did not know what his own story meant. Okay. Because the muse knows, but I don't know. I'm just the loyal servant of heaven. I just write down what I'm told to write down. See? Now, not many writers talk this way anymore. The ancient Greeks did. I do. But when a filmmaker says something about his own film that everyone and his brother knows is just wrong, sorry, that is not what Star Wars is about. When that first word crawl first opened back in the 1970s, even though no one in the audience was old enough to remember those 1940s cliffhangers, everyone knew what kind of film that was.
Yep.
When it said Princess Leia was being chased by the sinister agents of the Empire, we all knew what she was because she was a space princess. We all knew what the Empire was because it was an evil empire. We all knew what the Death Star was because what a great name for a giant evil space station. Okay, it was the castle of an evil ogre that was being inhabited by a dark knight who's actually a knight. Okay. So don't give me any guff about Joseph Campbell or other archetypes. All the serials, all the chapter plays, all the pulps drew on those archetypes. But Star Wars was coming from the pulps. Star Wars is a space opera and one of the best I've ever seen. And I'm sorry that the guys ruined it, but they had to provoke me, and I'm going to try to do my best to undo the damage they did. I'm going to do my darnest.
Everybody was always going to think of them as Americans against the British Empire. That's just the way it was always going to be. And George Lucas, he didn't have any choice. And I'm happy. I'm happy because that's the way that story should be. That's what that story really is at its core.
Well,
this is one of my.
If you're telling a story to Americans about rebellion, we're going to think of our rebellion.
Yeah.
We're going to think of the rebellion of the freedom lovers against the oppressive empire. We're not going to think of a mutiny of bad guys against a good empire. You know that I've never read anyone who wrote a story where the rebels were the bad guys and the empire was the good guy. I've read stories where the communists were the bad guys who were trying to overthrow a decent civilization. But that was not Star Wars. You can't read Star Wars and say, oh yeah, this is the Viet Cong. This is the commies. The good guys are the commies, and the bad guys are the freedom loving people who have a constitutional democracy. Now, give me a break.
One of the things I've mentioned on this show several times is that what a writer needs to do is figure out what the story itself wants to be and let that be your guide.
You got to be brave to do that, though. You have to actually take your hands off the reins and let the horse give the horse's head.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the horse will ride you off the cliff, so you still have to retain some control. It's a balancing act. That's why being a writer is it's less difficult than being a horseman, but there's some of the same equipoise is required.
But oftentimes when I'm criticizing a movie that goes wrong, it is because it's so obviously, the story so obviously wanted to go in a specific direction that would be a satisfying ending, and the director or the writer or whatever just had to drag it in another direction for whatever various
because his philosophical worldview would not admit the ending that his muse was demanding. Yeah. Before I was a Christian, I once wrote a short story that had a very Christian flavored ending, which I myself didn't believe because at the time I was an atheist. But I wrote it because that's what the integrity of the story required. In the same background, within the same year after my conversion, I wrote another story that had a really nihilistic, really empty, really materialistic, despair-filled ending, an atheist ending. And I went with it, even though I was a Christian, because that's what the story required. See? Now, either you have artistic integrity or you don't. I shouldn't say, excuse me. Either you try for it or you don't try. Okay? And some writers just don't try, and I'm not sure why. I don't even know why they're in the writing business. The thing that's funny about The Last Jedi, and you've heard me complain very bitterly about it, I've seen other movies made by that guy, made by that director. Looper, Brick, film noir type movies, science
Yeah.
fiction time travel movies. That were
Ryan,
good.
Ryan Johnson,
Well put
he's
together.
okay.
Well put together, well acted, well directed, clever plot twists. I know he's got talent. I know he could have done a good job. He decided not to.
I will say this about Looper. It didn't betray the story.
Yeah. The ending, I don't want to give away the surprise ending, but it was an ending that grew logically out of the premise that they had set up.
Yeah.
Whereas Last Jedi, as you correctly said, not a single story element was logically or artistically linked to any other story element. You could have, in fact, in my book, that's one of the things I say, in my long book where I talk about this to no end. I said, if you can take a scene out of where it is, move it 20 minutes later and stick it in with no other change, and the story will not suffer or be better by doing that, then maybe your story elements have no internal consistency or coherence to them.
That's right.
Someone's asking if there's a chance of an audiobook. The answer is I don't know, but if there is a chance of an audiobook, I really would like to do it myself because I'm the only one who knows how their voices sound. And I want to do the outrageous Irish accent for Jaywin Starquest. By the way, Starquest is the name of my Luke Skywalker character. Instead of Skywalker, Starquest. Get it? Get it?
Got it.
So
good. Do you have any final words on your book?
I gave my final words when I gave my speech earlier, but I hope that even if this book fails, that the pulp revolution will not fail. And if I can't do it, I want someone else to do it. There's no reason why we should live in a society where Star Wars is spat upon, Star Trek turns into some feminist garbage, that the Terminator is replaced by a woman. I just want to see some good stories come to the fore again. So I hope everyone will get together. I hope all of us who are sick and tired of being insulted, being belittled. I'm tired of giving my money to people who hate me. Okay? Give your money to me because I love you. Fans, readers, I love you. Okay? You're the reason why I don't have to work an honest job. So
when does your book come out?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Comes out on the 8th.
And
if I had been clever, I would have had it come out today because today's the feast day of Lepanto. Today's the feast day of the great victory over the forces of sin and darkness that came from the east. So maybe the Star Wars, maybe my Star Quest thing will be an opening salvo in that great, ongoing, and eternal struggle.
And we put the link to the book in the description of the video.
Wonderful.
All right, Dornall, do you have any last thoughts?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming back on. It's always great to have you on, and I'm happy to hear you are pumped about the Pulp Rev and the future. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I got to give full credit to Jeffrey Johnson, whose Appendix N actually revived my interest in the books I read when I was a kid. Okay,
that's what we're all about.
So,
that's all I have to say for this week, DW.
Thank you, Mr. Hogwood. Okay, adios, bye bye, God bless.
All right, folks. This has been Geek Gab for Monday, October 7th, 2024. Let's see. We're available here on youtube.com/geekgab just about every Monday night, just about the same time, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. We're also available on the YouTube. We're also available on the Apple iTunes Store, on SoundCloud.com, and the Google Store. Just do a search for Geek Gab. You will find us. Listen to us on the device of your choice. Downloads to your computer, whatever you want. We want to thank everyone who listened live. We want to thank everyone who will tune in and listen later. Be sure to click the like if you like the show. Click the subscribe and the bell icon to get announcements as to when we are going live. Folks, we are signing out for today, but don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.